Ladies and gentlemen, the last thing we talked about, I do believe, is the Lowell system or the Waltham system. Did we sort of give any impact of how did people perceive the factories, and like what was people's opinion of it? Folks, the one question an intelligent person would probably want to know is, what did people think? Did it work? Well, clearly it worked for making money. I mean, there's no doubt Lowell did well. But the bigger question is, what about for the women? And ladies and gentlemen, that is a question not for our class, that's a question for life.
Yeah, why was this attractive to like the offer?
But think about it. It's an option to avoid marriage.
Okay, so
It's an option to get money. But the question is do you like it? And do you know what the reality of that question is? You have to use your own. There are people who don't like high school. There are people who hate college. There are diaries. There are girls who loved it. There are girls who got freedom, they got away from their parents. There are girls who met husbands. I mean, think about it. Some people love summer camp. Some people hate it. Some girls, I mean, there are diaries. Again, if you look more like document stuff, there are girls who literally every night, they would write letters home and they would cry. And the only reason they didn't leave is they didn't have money to get, a stagecoach and go back home. Probably one of the best examples is the famous poet Emily Dickinson. She actually toured the factory, and she loved it. She sort of made comments, I wish I could have done this. So, folks, when you look at the Lowell system, the biggest thing I want you to think of is there is no right or wrong answer in terms of was it good or bad, or it's a factory system. Folks, the purpose really wasn't to make girls happier. The purpose wasn't to make girls feel better about themselves. The purpose was to make more textile money. So, ladies and gentlemen, the next item that we'd like to look at is the fourth system is not really a system, it's immigration. Ladies and gentlemen, what destroys Rhode Island, what destroys the putting out, or the Lowell system will be immigration. Ladies and gentlemen, by the mid-1840s, the United States is going to experience it'll be the first in our history, an enormous boom in immigration. Ladies and gentlemen, what we want to talk about is there are going to be two causes, and please, hint, 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 hint. The two causes for the immigration boom, they connect to every single thing of our class. They connect to politics, they connect to the growth of America, they connect to industry. They fit well here and get stuck in factory work. Ladies and gentlemen, what happens and why does immigrants replace Lowell? Because under immigration, you can now hire an adult male and pay him the same or maybe less than a teenage girl. So, folks, think about it. Most of the immigrants who come to America, they use every penny to get across the ocean, and when they're here, many of them have children. They have a family. If you don't have money, they don't eat. And what's the reality? They are willing to work, do anything to get money. So a lot of them will take any job. We are going to see immigrants are coming in large numbers. This is the greatest situation on earth for the owners, because now you have this enormous surplus of workers, and if anybody kind of talks back, you fire them and you hire a couple of new people. You have no loyalty to workers. They're simply a tool. I mean, let's be honest. How many of you really feel bad if your pliers breaks? Ladies and gentlemen, when we look at immigration, what we want to look at is there's a couple of really important things that go with it. So folks, the big thing is immigrants, they're going to be adult men, and they're going to work for anything. I mean, literally, if you offer them a job, they're going to take it because something is better than nothing. So let's look at a couple of things. Basically, why are they coming? Number one. There are two types of immigrants. Let's do that first. One reason people move is what is called a push factor. A push factor is a problem in your country. There is a disease. There is a war. There is a religious attack. Ladies and gentlemen, with push factors, please write down the Irish. The Irish are going to come to America by the boatload. They are going to come to America, and they are coming because of flat out, this is not a joke, the potato famine. Ladies and gentlemen, I remember my father telling me this years ago. I think it was his justification of why he could eat mashed potatoes all the time, is according to scientific studies, if you could only eat one food, what one food would actually keep you the healthiest with the most different nutrients? It was a potato. The people in Ireland largely survived off of potatoes because it provided enough different vitamins that if you didn't get other things, you would not be inherently malnourished. What happened is a disease went through the ground of Ireland. The potato crops began to wither up. Either you left or you starved. That's it. I mean, that's the Irish. Now, let's see how smart we are. Ladies and gentlemen, if the Irish come flooding to America, the Irish, for the next 40 years, are going to have two huge check marks against them. If you think about American mentality and America standards, what are the two negatives against the Irish people? One, they're Catholic. Ladies and gentlemen, America historically was Protestant, right? And now you've got the Irish. Folks, remember how America was Puritans and we left England because the Catholics were always the pushy ones? Well, now these Catholics are coming here. Revenge time, baby. Because now, after all those, the Catholics are the pushy ones, they're coming to our country. We're going to get eaten. Folks, what is the other problem that the Irish have? Folks, I would generally argue that today it's still the reason we dislike people. I'm sorry. And when I say dislike, I mean as a societal, it's looked at as a negative. Poor. Ladies and gentlemen, when you think about Irish in our history, they are generally poor and they are Catholic. And because the religion is different, that is kind of looked at as negatively. Because they are poor, that is generally looked at as negatively. They are a problem. They are a burden. If any of you want to get an understanding of what this is like, what we are talking about, please, over the weekend, over the Thanksgiving break, go and watch Gangs of New York. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a Daniel Day-Lewis. Remember the guy who played Lincoln, the guy in Last of the Mohicans? There is action. Leonardo DiCaprio is kind of the second main character. I would never recommend a movie if I would not sit and watch it. It is a good movie. There is fighting. But what you notice is the main issue is it is about the Irish people in New York and how they are kind of fighting to survive. It is a historical movie, but I'm flat out telling you, do it in a Hollywood sense, that it is very entertaining. It will give you a lot of background in terms of what is going on in the class. I recommend it. In fact, if you go online and you don't believe me, there is a lot of schools that actually assign movies like that, Last of the Mohicans, and it is literally considered part of your responsibility to watch. A lot of schools tell you to do it over the summer. Do it. So, ladies and gentlemen, for the Irish, those are their two problems. And folks, what is the big summary with them? Because they're coming because of these push factors, the Irish are the ones who get stuck in the factories. Because they don't have money, what can't they do? They can't buy land, and more important, they can't move. Because the land in Boston, the land in New York is all what? What? It's owned, right? Land that is owned is going to be more expensive. Where is the cheaper land?
West.
The problem is, in order to get there, you have to have a wagon. You have to have horses. And what? Seriously. Folks, this is sometimes the question I'll get to, Griff. I'm sorry.
No problem.
What is the dream, honestly, of every Irish man when they come to America? Folks, they dream of land. And the reality is many of the Irish will never do that. They come, they begin to work in one of these textile factories, and they never leave. Remember how we said New York? New York has people coming from this way, and of course they have people coming because they're coming across the Great Lakes. Ladies and gentlemen, so let's look at the other type of immigration. The other type of immigration is what are called pull factors. If you think about it, pull means something is pulling. Ladies and gentlemen, pull has nothing to do with disease or famine or war. Pull factors are things in your country that are so great, so wonderful, that attract people. Freedoms, representation in government, economic opportunity, and let's be honest, land. Land. Ladies and gentlemen, and if you want to look, where did that come from? Why did a guy sitting in Europe all of a sudden go, hey, I'm going to go to America? Ladies and gentlemen, it is often blamed on a book. A gentleman by the name of Alex Tocqueville. If you would, you can go ahead and write it down. Tocqueville. Folks, Tocqueville was a very famous, very popular author, and what happens about this time, he came to America, and he kind of did like the American tour. He went around, and then what happens is he writes a book, and his book is called Democracy in America. To some degree, I don't know if this is what Griffin was getting at, but what you want to think of, folks, is Alex Tocqueville was just a guy who came to America, he writes a book, and what happens is Alex Tocqueville becomes America's greatest advertising campaign. Because what happens is he writes this book, and if you read it, what becomes the translation? Land of opportunity. I mean, that is literally what begins to travel across Europe. Because when you read the book, what people, okay, so these people can vote? Holy crap. These people are protected of this, this, and this? Holy crap. There's land in this country for free? Holy crap. So people begin to come. But it creates this idea almost as if America is kind of this perfect place, the land of opportunity, and there's this desire to go. And now look at the difference. Folks, this is the part where sometimes I wonder, don't you ever sort of ask questions without being told? Folks, the group of people here will be the Germans. Now, as I say that, a lot of people, well, why would I just ever think? Folks, when did I say this starts? Around 1840. Does anybody know when Wisconsin becomes a state? 48. Huh. So that means as the immigrants began to come, what part of the country must have been the next available open land? Wisconsin, Michigan? Huh. Have you ever noticed the amount of German ancestry? The beer brewing, a lot of the names, right? There's also a lot of Scandinavians. Ladies and gentlemen, why did the Germans get to go to Wisconsin?
They have money.
When they came for opportunity. Folks, most of the Germans who came had money in their pocket. They sold their house, they sold their mule, they brought that to America, and they were able to buy or get passage to the place where there was opportunity. So make no mistake, the Germans are going to have a very different experience in America, because remember, the Irish literally come with the shirt on their back because it was leave or die. The Germans, they of course were coming because they believe America's better than they were, but they had time to plan and come up with that. Let's look at a couple of other basic facts. Real quickly, I would like to mention the name Peter Cooper. Again, we're going to connect him with industry. You could connect him to transportation. That was the last unit. Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Cooper is the man who invented the train. Peter Cooper invented the first train. Now, just so we're being fair, there are some people who would argue that there was a European who did it first, so you could say the first American train, but that his name is Peter Cooper, and his train is called Tom Thumb. And for those of you who have ever played Monopoly, the first American railroad was B&O, Baltimore and Ohio. Ladies and gentlemen, does anybody know why the train is so important to our class in the future? Ladies and gentlemen, trains can go anywhere. You don't need water. You can travel across this great country. Please understand, water transportation is wonderful, but it is restricted to water. You need water. We even tried to build water, didn't we? I mean, look at the stupid Erie Canal. We built a train. Folks, what are other reasons trains are amazing? Folks, they are fast. So you have a fast form of transportation. They can go anywhere. Anything else? It's going to create a lot of jobs. It's going to create, in fact, more importantly, they create other industries. Folks, in order to have a train, what are you going to need a lot of? I mean a lot.
Iron.
You need iron. You're also going to need coal. What's the other really important thing with trains? Bless you. Let's be honest. Are trains really going up against just the boats? What is the old land transportation? Why does the horse suck? Sorry, horsey. They are unbelievably powerful. make no mistake. And folks, do you know what the amazing thing is about trains? If you have a train, it exerts the same amount of energy if it's fully full or empty. Because trains operate on largely a friction system. So in order to power and heat the engines, really once a train gets going, whether all of the cars are full and it's at maximum capacity, or it has no cars, it literally requires the same amount of. So therefore, what type of products do trains favor?
Big stuff.
You want large, bulky, high quantity, fill it up, you know, things like iron and coal, petroleum, and we're going to go all across the country. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are like, well, why don't we have trains? Because the trains get so greedy, they were so powerful, that at the end of the century, we made laws to limit them and restrict them, and many of the laws have not been replaced. The trades basically, you know, they kind of killed themselves. Do you think the trucking companies want to see the laws come back for the trains? Much more energy efficient. I mean, trains have a lot of advantages in terms of power, in terms of, I mean, even environmental issues. There's one other thing I'd want to just be sure to point out, because sometimes I think we forget about things. What is the one weakness, if we're talking about our good old boats? What is a way you can, other than no water? Folks, what is another thing? Think about it. Boats require water. What is the limitation of our good old boats? Ladies and gentlemen, if you live in Wisconsin or the north, the water can literally become seasonal. Our trains live by the weather. They can go through the desert. They can go through the mountains. They can go over water with a bridge. And ladies and gentlemen, if it comes to snow, have anybody ever known have you ever seen what was on the front of a train?
Wow.
Which technically is called what? What is their real purpose? Why did they make those? They're cow catchers. For those you don't know, cows sometimes are stupid and they would stand in the middle of the track. And ladies and gentlemen, does anybody feel bad about the poor cow? Is that why we have it? I mean, first of all, if the train hits the cow, is Cowie okay? No, bad. Moo-moo's in trouble. Folks, why is there a cow catcher there? How? If it wasn't for the cow catcher, you would hit and the cow would go where? Under. And it would derail the train. That's when trains have problems. What the cow catcher does is it's got the V that pushes him to the side. That's the purpose. Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Cooper was very proud of his train. In fact, if I didn't tell you, the original train was named Tom Thumb. And Peter Cooper is so proud that he organizes a race. And he is going to show the entire country the power of the train. He sets up this race, and he gets all this publicity. And basically in the race, it's going to be a train, and it's going to have like 2 cars, and they're fully loaded. And of course they brag about the amount of weight, and they literally took a racehorse. And the racehorse and the train were going to race. And the race was something like 7-8 miles, because literally that's all the track there was in America. And ladies and gentlemen, they shoot a gun and they take off, and clearly this was kind of like a publicity show. They were going to show people the future. And ladies and gentlemen, according to the famous race, and it's publicized in newspapers and all, you can go back, you go on the internet, you type in, Peter Cooper's race or Tom Thumb race, and it'll, you'll pull up little newspapers. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, what is it? It's 1831, something like that. Tom Thumb broke down. The train broke down, and literally, it was the big embarrassment, the big joke. Horsey won. And does anybody know what story that is based off of? Tortoise and the Hare. Yeah. What's the whole thing? The hare, if you've ever read kind of the Real Children one, the hare is cocky and arrogant, and he's fast and speedy, and he is that's the train, right? And of course, what was the tortoise? Plodding along, slow and steady and reliable. Ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake, the train is our future. The train is going to completely revolutionize. We are talking about the textile revolution. The railroad revolution is the revolution that turns America into the America today. If you are looking at a time machine situation and went back, if we put any of you back to this period that we're in right now, we would be in like, holy crap. Remember, no electricity, no cars, I mean, no telegraph, most of us would be like, whoa. If you go to the end of the century, once the train has come in, and once the train has begun to transform America, the world would seem much more familiar. So please be aware. Now, can anyone tell me, if this item was invented around 1830, why will the big train revolution not begin until more like 1870?
The Civil War.
Ladies and gentlemen, what you want to be aware of is America was pushing. Because by the time of the Civil War, railroads would be spread across up to the Mississippi River. They had not gone across, the Louisiana. They had not gone out to California. What happens is America was beginning to industrialize. America was really beginning to get going. And what happens is the Civil War creates a horrible, devastating 4-year thing. And then once the war is over, it's literally this period of what just happened. But the Civil War kind of slows us down for a little bit. Otherwise, the Industrial Revolution probably would have happened 10 or 15 years earlier, like the big boom. Ladies and gentlemen, one more item I'd like to at least make a quick reference to is please understand when we talk about cotton, there are 2 benefits. One, cotton prices continue to rise. So you have, if you're a southern person, you have cotton prices rising and cotton production absolutely explodes. Think of it this way. In 1790, so literally just before the cotton gin, the United States was making 3,000 bales of cotton a year. 3,000. By 1820, we were making 400,000 bales a year. So that is really kind of when you look at the growth and the expansion of the United States, that is really how the cotton and the textiles is going to come into play. Ladies and gentlemen, the next one I think is on your term list. That might be one that you want to make sure of. So I'm sure someone will be able to tell me, who's Paul Coffey? Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Coffey is a preacher from Massachusetts. And in 1815, and for those of you who think this is dumb and stupid, please understand, this idea will continue into the 1950s. Throughout our class, this idea is going to come up over and over. Paul Coffey started the American Colonization Society. Now, when I say that, a lot of you are like, wait, America's going to become a mother, we're going to become mercantilist. And I understand that the name maybe is going to fool you. Ladies and gentlemen, the American Colonization Society, Paul Coffey, what would be the question you'd see on some sort of multiple choice? Paul Coffey was founder of what today or later will be known as Back to Africa. Paul Coffey was proposing that we should create colonies in Africa and encourage and allow Africans to go home. So ladies and gentlemen, when you look at Anthony Carl, when you look at Paul Coffey, what you really see is the beginning of what will start becoming the abolition, the emancipation, people who are beginning to reject or go against slavery. The next item we'd like to look at is probably more of what some of you might have thought about. The next person is going to be, and again, these are very different. The next one we'd like to look at is going to be a gentleman by the name of Gabriel Prosser. Ladies and gentlemen, Gabriel Prosser is going to be the first documented case of a slave organizing, creating, plotting a slave revolt. Now, to a lot of you, you would probably imagine this is common. It's kind of like, and some of you can laugh at me, I'm okay with that, I'm a big boy now. Ever since I've been a kid, you drive up north, and depending on what expressway you drive by one of the state prisons. I'll be honest, I can remember still when I was a kid, we'd be driving up north, and every time we'd drive by them, I'd be looking out going, okay, is there anybody escaping? I'm being honest, I would always be looking going, okay, where are they? Because my mind was, if I was in prison, oh, look at what's here. My thing is I would not want to be in prison, so I would be trying to escape. It would seem logical. Doesn't it seem logical that slaves would constantly revolt? And ladies and gentlemen, when you look at Gabriel Prosser, you're going to find out why. Ladies and gentlemen, Gabriel Prosser is going to organize a revolt. And real quickly, you're going to figure out why slaves don't revolt. Ladies and gentlemen, Gabriel Prosser organized it, and what the general belief was, it was soon. They had a plan, they had weapons stockpiled. What happens is a slave snitches. One of the slaves basically got scared. They went to the master and they told. The masters looked and they found the weapons. They found sort of some written notes. And ladies and gentlemen, here is the part that creates the issue. Without a trial, without any kind of hearing, Gabriel Prosser and 36 slaves are executed. They are killed. Folks, a common strategy used by slave masters. If Ivana runs away and she's one of my slaves, what I do is the next day I take slaves that she was friends with, I bring them out in front of everybody, and I whip them 30 times. And if she's not back or caught the next day, I bring her friends out and I whip them again. A very simple lesson is if you hear someone talk about escaping, if they go, the rest of you will be punished. Ladies and gentlemen, please understand, slaves live in constant fear. Masters can do anything they want. Slaves are afraid that they will be punished. They are afraid that they will be, whether they stay or they go. That's what happens. The next example is a man named Denmark Vesey.